Space travel. It's a hot button issue, at least among those interested in futurism. Whether space travel is the boon that will expand our horizons as a species, take us to new heights, literally and figuratively, expand our technology, give us new resources, and potentially bring us in contact with other civilizations, or whether it's an enormous waste of money that could be spent developing other technologies, fixing problems that are here and now, and otherwise staying grounded, depends hugely on your perspective. And there are intelligent people that come down on both sides of this issue. It's a significant and weighty subject and can't be covered by any one discussion. What I want to examine today are the choices and potential implications of NASA's plan to allow tourists to potentially visit the International Space Station, which is effectively a first step in a larger space tourism plan, both from NASA itself and from other companies in the commercial industry. These plans, especially the longer term ones, are, frankly, moonshots. No pun intended. That's a lie. Pun intended. And it seems like, at first glance, a poor investment, in the sense that the time and effort currently required to prepare and bring people to the International Space Station, or even just outside the atmosphere, is so significant that it would be hard to maintain profitability and hard to find enough people to make this a going concern. For many of the commercial spaceflight companies, the goal of space tourism is the first toehold in a much taller ladder. If they can get investors interested for personal reasons of being able to go and see space and say that this is something they have done and they're willing to drop a significant amount of money on this, then it will incline more of these people to invest heavily in this industry, thus propelling it further. Now, that's from the perspective of the private companies themselves. Their self-declared interests do not necessarily reflect the truth or falseness of the societal desire for space exploration. It's more that the CEO and the people involved and those who are working on it and potentially the investors are interested in it, and that propels them all on their own. It's a different subject when you look at something like NASA, which is government funded and whose budget reflects the current state of how the country, or at least its representatives, view the importance of space travel, space exploration, research, etc. So what is NASA's goal here? Can they expect to bring in enough space tourism this way to raise more funds outside of their budget to be able to further their missions? Well, it seems that NASA may have more practical reasons for doing this than simply trying to raise some immediate funds. It wouldn't be the first time that a space tourist would visit the ISS. As far back as 2001, the billionaire Dennis Tito managed to secure for himself a round trip to the ISS, and some credit this and the fact that he had to fight so hard for it and the news that it made as part of what enabled the future success of companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin. And this is because actually visiting space and the ISS, especially if one has an interest in space travel, if one has this romantic sense of it to begin with, there's something fundamentally inspiring about seeing the Earth from outer space. There's an idea called the overview effect, that seeing Earth isolated out there with all of our earthly concerns and history and drama playing out just on this one ball that's just sitting there, surrounded by nothingness, that you tend to gain a sense of perspective. And this perspective not only can benefit humanity as a whole through worldliness, cohesiveness, thinking about things differently, but recognizing the value of this also may lend the individual a sense of the importance of space travel, space research, space industry. Now, the plan is currently for the ISS to no longer be funded by the government at all by the year 2025. The ISS then would be fully privatized. How this fits in with other government-funded space research, especially considering the struggles to continue to allow NASA to rely on private spacecraft and the continual adjustments in the forthcoming moon landings, it's in NASA's best interest, in a way that it definitely would not have been even a few years ago, to A, steer commercial investors towards the space industry, which is now less a competitor and more of a support system, and B, to convince people that space travel is important. This space evangelism, as you might call it, seems to be an increasingly important cornerstone of the space industry. Despite the high investment costs necessary to support any kind of space travel at the moment, this very niche market is consistently struggling to get a hold of a larger segment of the population in terms of interest. It currently relies heavily on certain key investors as well as on collaboration with NASA. So the conceptualization of a more privatized future, perhaps guided to some extent by NASA, which can spearhead certain kinds of research and dedicated missions that private companies cannot. There's a distinct need for a reliance on getting people around the country and around the world to buy into the significance of what's being attempted and what's already been accomplished and what's going to be accomplished, if NASA and SpaceX and Blue Origins and other companies have their say. A lot of these aspects are constantly in flux, but there's a lot of it going on right now. The Artemis program, which is graduating the astronauts that will be on the next flights to the moon, preparations and tests for manned capsules, bills on funding going through Congress. There's a lot of contention and a lot of unknowns, but also a lot of promise from the perspective of the space industry. And all of it seems to hinge on having not only the correct people, but as many people as possible believing that this is important. And the more people who get out there and see space and see Earth hanging there and really understand what's being accomplished, the easier it will be to get buy-in. Not only financial buy-in, but emotional, philosophical buy-in. To get people really pumped up about it, effectively bringing back the initiative and burgeoning sense of hope and promise that were so present in the 60s, and applying it to today and tomorrow and looking forward in a way that perhaps society hasn't in a long time. It's a perspective that will take time to shift and will require some major successes to really bring to fruition. And NASA now seems to be putting some stake in the notion that seeing is believing.